Good afternoon. It is 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the U.S. And, good day to everyone around the world. This is the Keys to Understanding the Middle East podcast. And we are coming to you from Ohio State University's Middle East Studies Center. So I'm Melinda McClymans. I'm the assistant director of the center, and this is the director of the center, Dr. Alam Payind. We're going to be talking about current events pertaining to Afghanistan and the troop withdrawal today, but also just giving you some background information about Afghanistan and hopefully a deeper understanding so that you can break down any headline that you come across whenever it comes to Afghanistan, but also the surrounding region. Dr. Payind is an expert in geopolitics, so perfect speaker on this issue. He's also an expert in Islamic jurisprudence. He got his BA from Kabul University in political science and Islamic studies. He got his his MS in higher education from Indiana University and his MA in political science from Indiana University, and went on to get a PhD in political science and higher education from Indiana University. He has been the director of the Middle East Studies Center since 1986, and he's a senior teaching member of the International Studies program here at Ohio State University. And he also is a faculty member for Near Eastern Languages and Cultures. Born and raised in Afghanistan and previously a holder of government and academic positions in Kabul, he speaks Pashto, Dari, and Urdu with native fluency, and he continues to conduct field work in Afghanistan. He goes to, before COVID-19, he was going to Afghanistan on a regular basis, and he also travels within Afghanistan. He saw the Taliban's resurgence in Kandahar, Helmand, Zabul, and other provinces. And he's also a poet, which not everyone knows, and he is an avid reciter of famous poems, not only of Afghanistan, but of the whole Middle East region in languages such as Pashto, Persian, and Urdu. So yeah, it's my great pleasure to introduce you, Dr. Payind, today, and to just get the chance to ask you a few questions about what's going on with Afghanistan. Is there anything you'd like to add to your?
Thank you, Melinda. You give more than I expected.
So tell us about who are Afghans? Tell us about Afghanistan. Kind of give us a review of the country and its diversity.
Yes, that's a very good question. Mostly when I gave these lectures at different universities or in different countries, so that question is raised that why Afghanistan was invaded that so many times throughout the history, and who are Afghans? Well, Afghanistan is a new name for a very ancient piece of land. Different parts of Afghanistan were called different regions in the past, like Kabulistan, for example, the Kabul, which is the capital of Afghanistan and surrounding areas. And then the eastern Afghanistan, which is now Jalalabad, and parts of the northwestern frontier. It used to be called Gandhara throughout the history and in the history books. And section of which is Kandahar now in the southwest part of Afghanistan. It used to be called Arachozia. The Greeks have given those names. So it's an old name of Afghanistan, and a section of Afghanistan in the history books are Bactria or Bactriana. Those were the two names that were used in the history books. It was a small civilization of the Central Asian people, mostly Indo-European or Indo-Aryan people. Before the Persians invaded Afghanistan, the Persian Empire, the Achaemenian Persians, conquered Afghanistan in 550 BC. So that was the first superpower of the time which conquered Afghanistan, and then from Afghanistan moved to India. The riches of India. That was in 500, so it was the middle of the 500 BC. Then Alexander the Great defeated the Persians. Then Alexander the Great came to Afghanistan, and he and his armies came to Afghanistan, and then from Afghanistan moved to India. Then other empire builders also came to Afghanistan. Because Afghanistan is located, what we call Afghanistan today, its geostrategic location is very important. It is in the confluence of civilizations, like the Chinese civilization, which is a neighboring country of Afghanistan, the Indian civilization, the Middle Eastern civilization. So if you see that that's in confluence of civilizations and the trade routes and the route of migration, both the Silk Road and the Spice Road passed through Afghanistan. So Afghanistan became a geostrategic prize for many of the empire builders, and they came and conquered Afghanistan. But the important point here is that all of these conquerors who have come and gone, they have left their traces in Afghanistan. And that's one reason why Afghanistan is today a multi-ethnic, multilingual, and in many cases, a sectarian groups in Afghanistan. Of Afghan ethnic groups, Pashtuns are the ones which are speaking Pashto. They're Indo-Iranian people. They're the 40% pluralistic majority in Afghanistan. Then the second group is also Tajiks, who speaks Farsi, a Persian language. They're the second largest group. And then we have Hazaras in the central of Afghanistan. They're Mongols. Some historians are saying that they came with the Genghis Khan armies, but that has been rejected by the historians and philologists, because Genghis Khan invaded Afghanistan in the 13th century. In the 800 or 900 years, the Mongol language totally do not disappear. So because Hazaras do not have the traces of the Mongol language. So that's what this theory was rejected. So Hazaras are at the central of Afghanistan, is the third largest group. Then we have Baloch, another ethnic group. Then we have Hindus in Afghanistan. Hindus, before the advent of Islam, the religion of Afghans were, some of them were Hindus, some of them were Buddhists, some of them were Zoroastrians, because Zoroaster was born in today's Afghanistan in Balkh, some 800 years before the birth of Jesus. So Afghanistan is today a multi-ethnic, multilingual, as sectarian Shiites and Sunnis. So the foreign invasions always disturbed the equilibrium which existed in Afghanistan. When they left the groups which were close to that invading armies. They converted people to the religions of the invading armies, just like the Muslims did, the Greeks did, the Hindus did, the Buddhists did, and the Zoroastrians. So Afghanistan today is a multi-ethnic, multilingual country. And again, in the 20th century, in the 19th century, the British invaded Afghanistan in 1838 to 1842. When they left, the civil war pursued. So whenever invading armies come and they go back, the country fights with each other, different ethnic groups. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989, when they left a communist party in place, and the armies and the arms, and then the Afghans use it against each other. Now it's a turn for the United States. The United States will abandon Afghanistan after 20 years. This is the longest war in the history of the United States. American troops entered Afghanistan in August. I think it was October 7, 2001. American troops went to Afghanistan. October 7, 2001. They are still in Afghanistan. And President Trump started to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan, the remaining troops. Now there are only about 2,500 American troops remaining in Afghanistan. And the deadline by the Biden administration is that they would leave Afghanistan on September 11, 2021. So now the most important question is that what will happen to the Afghans when American troops are withdrawing, the NATO troops are coming back home? Everyone's guess inside Afghanistan is that Afghanistan will again experience a civil war, just like when the Soviets left after 10 years of occupation, they left armies and collaborators. And now about 18,000 Afghans have worked with Americans as contractors, as translators, and it's more than 18,000. So Americans have to either bring them, just like they did when they left Vietnam. So there are some parallel with Americans withdrawing from Vietnam. And later, Vietnamese were better. They really straightened their things up. But in Afghanistan, no one is thinking that it will be a peaceful Afghanistan after the American troops and the NATO troops are withdrawing from Afghanistan. So now I will just let you ask the questions.
So you point out that after invaders leave, oftentimes there's civil war, even starting from when the British were there in the 1800s, in the early 19th century. Do you think that's inevitable, or do you think that it has to do with what invaders do when they're there and how they leave, like the way they withdraw?
When you look at the history, any invading army which goes to another country, they're the minority, because the population in India is. So what happened? These invading armies will have to have collaborators inside Afghanistan to help them. So that's what many of the invaders have used, the divide and conquer policies. They would recruit some people from some ethnic groups that were the minority, are there somehow discriminated against. Just like the British went to Egypt, for example, they would recruit Coptic Christians who were Christians, but they were Coptic. So that's what they do have, domestic collaborators who would take their side. Like when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, there was the Communist Party in Afghanistan. And the Soviet Union armed them, give them weapons and give them positions. When they left a pro-Soviet government in Afghanistan, and people did not like that, and that's what civil war pursued after that. When Americans went to Afghanistan, they recruited the Northern Alliance people, because the Northern Alliance helped Americans to expel the Taliban and Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. So Americans were looking for collaborators inside Afghanistan, and the Northern Alliance was there. So now Northern Alliance is armed, they have money, they have militias. When Americans will leave, they're probably the strongest group. And again, another group is Taliban. Taliban are also armed, and the Northern Alliance people, they would fight against each other. So unless, I do not know, it would be a miracle that they would not fight against each other, with each other. So that's mostly the invading armies are looking for people who would help the invaders, because otherwise it is only armies. Armies cannot rule the whole country. So they will need for people who would support the invading armies, the invading power. So that has been the history. When the British went to India, they recruited some of the minority groups like Sikhs and Pashtuns in their armed forces, the Balochs. And then when the British left, the Gorkhas, for example, we know that they were the Nepalese. So they could not rule India by themselves. So what happened? They had to have in their armies and their offices and the tax collectors and other people who would be at the payroll of the what do you call, the British Empire in India. So when they leave, all these people do not leave; they remain. So in Afghanistan, there's literally about probably 60,000 Afghans were working with Americans, either as translators or drivers or people who are providing food and other logistics. So either Americans will have to bring each one of them, or they will be, and some people think that they will be slaughtered by Taliban when they come back to Afghanistan.
Oh, wow. That's horrible.
Yeah, it's a dangerous perspective for when you look at from the perspective of those who worked with Americans, hundreds and thousands of them. Yeah.
So, so the Taliban see them as traitors, basically.
Yes, when you look at from the fighting groups, just like the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong and others, the people who were working with Americans, they were all considered to be collaborators with the United States. And the United States brought hundreds and thousands of them, these South Vietnamese. So, but the North succeeded. But apparently the slaughter was not as big as people expected. The Vietnamese quickly put their house in order. And that was really a sort of miracle when you look at after 11 or 12 years of the United States occupation of Vietnam.
Right.
Some people think that I hope that that will happen to Afghans after Americans leave Afghanistan after 20 years of intervention in Afghanistan. Even though Americans do not call it invasion. But from the Taliban's perspective and other, when foreign armies goes to a country and takes the security of that country and economy of that country and administration of that country under control, it is an occupation, whether you call it intervention or you call it collaboration or whatever.
Is that what we call it? I mean, is that what the American government calls it? Intervention?
Yeah, they call it intervention. They went there. Yeah, Americans would not have gone to Afghanistan if September the 11th would not have happened.
Yeah.
If Al-Qaeda would not have been in Afghanistan and the plan would not have been made there, and Taliban were not surrendering the Al-Qaeda, they could not do that. So that was the United States argument, was that, well, either surrender the Al-Qaeda and Taliban, because they consider both of them to be not helping. In the United States, when, according to Americans, it's a just war. It's a defensive war because the United States was attacked by outsiders. 3,000 Americans were killed in New York and Washington, D.C. Those 4 planes which were hijacked on September the 11th. So, but the Soviet invasion was much different than the American. Soviet Union did not have any reason to come to Afghanistan. They were not threatened by Afghanistan. The Soviet Union was not bombarded by any terrorist group from Afghanistan. So the Soviet invasion, and some people are comparing both of them, but they're not comparable. Soviet Union came to Afghanistan without having any legitimate reason. But in the case of Americans, the September the 11th was one of the events which happened. And Americans decided that to go after those people who killed 3,000 Americans in New York.
Yeah.
And about, I don't know, 200 or 300 in Pentagon, which was one plane crashed there. And 2 planes hit the 2 Twin Towers, one Pentagon, and another one crashed in Pennsylvania somewhere. So those were the 4 planes hijacked on September the 11th, 2001.
Yeah. So just going back to the ethnic diversity, if there is some kind of conflict between the Northern Alliance and the Taliban, would that fall along ethnic lines as well?
Yes. Northern Alliance is made up of Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, Turkomans. These are all either Turkic tribes in the north of Afghanistan. So that's for the Northern Alliance. They were fighting against the Taliban even before the United States went to Afghanistan. So the only group which fought and put a very stiff resistance against Taliban were the Northern Alliance. Mm. They are blood enemies of each other. And people hope that they will not go and kill each other after Americans leave and the NATO forces leave. But both of these groups are armed to the teeth. Both the Northern Alliance groups, Uzbek, Tajik, Turkoman, and some of the names that we hear here and there, there is commanders, and many of them are very brutal on both sides.
Yeah.
And there a lot of blood have been spilled between Taliban and the Northern Alliance. And some people think that that's one reason why some people say that withdrawing from Afghanistan irresponsibly, not leaving something workable system in Afghanistan, a workable government in Afghanistan, and just withdraw the troops. Afghanistan will probably, there's a possibility, there's a very highly likely that there will be another civil war after that.
So yeah, it kind of goes back to the question of not only how you act when you go into a country, but then also how you withdraw matters a lot. And I can understand the fatigue that Americans have with occupation but it is a thorny issue, isn't it?
Yes. When you look at it from the military point of view, a military action, when you go to a country intervention, at the beginning, they do not plan that they will stay really 20 years in Afghanistan. Nobody planned, nobody thought it will happen. And nobody thought that there will be a revival. Taliban were expelled, Al-Qaeda was expelled from Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden was killed about 12, 13 years ago. So it did not end. The movement which was created by Al-Qaeda, it did not die. Taliban have not been defeated. They've been removed from power. They went and set their tents inside of Pakistan. And the Pakistani ISI and the Pakistani military is supporting it. Without the support of Pakistan, Taliban will have difficulty. So they're armed. They're controlling trade routes, the commercial routes. They're charging money, the people who are transporting whatever goods from one place to another one. And they're in control of the arteries in Afghanistan. And they're in control of almost about 30 to 35 to 40% of the rural areas in Afghanistan. And again, all these talks in Doha between Americans and the Taliban did not result into something concrete. And again, coming to that, so Americans went to Afghanistan. September the 11th was the terrorist act. October the 7th, less than a month later, American troops went to Afghanistan, aerial bombardment in the ground forces. It was not planned from the beginning that how should we withdraw? What conditions we should leave behind? It was not a well thought. In any invasion, people should think that, well, what if we do not succeed? What are the next, third, fourth? Because invasion is easy. And then it becomes the chess game that you have to think about the second move, third move, fourth move, and fifth move. If you do not think though, it's a bad plan. So the Soviet Union came to Afghanistan with a bad plan. It failed. So somehow I can say that Americans went to Afghanistan with not a very organized plan. That's not succeeding. Americans went to Vietnam without any sort of long-range planning. So these mistakes were made, and I think books will be written on this subject. That I don't think that anyone in the United States were thinking that American troops will be in Afghanistan for 20 years, and Americans will lose about close to 3,000 men and women, and about 12, 13,000 of them being badly wounded. And Americans will spend about over $2 trillion in Afghanistan. Over $2 trillion in Afghanistan. I don't think that this was planned the way it was supposed to. But it's easy for us now to say these things. But I'm certain that the military planners did not think these things at the time when they intervened in Afghanistan. And the same is true for the Soviet Union. They made big, huge mistakes in Afghanistan too.
Yeah, well, not to mention leaving behind all those mines and unexploded ordnance.
Weapons. They left tons of weapons for their own collaborators. The Communist Party in Afghanistan, the PDPA, which is the People Democratic Party. They left all the weapons that they, except this. And major planes were taken out and some of the tanks, but many of the weapons were left for the Afghan government. And we do not know that. What are Americans going to do? Are they going to destroy every single tank, every single machine gun, and are they taking everything out of Afghanistan? At some point, I heard that Pakistan said that, well, we'll bring those through Pakistan and give it to us. That would strengthen the Pakistani military and ISI even more. So this is not a good plan to give everything to the Pakistanis. And Americans cannot take every tank. They have to destroy it. They have to explode all those things which could be used, from hand grenades to machine guns to a lot of equipment is in Afghanistan.
Wow, yeah. I mean, well, not to mention the base. There must be more than one base in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, there was one. Many of the bases were built by the Soviet Union. during the Soviet occupation. And now Americans are in control of those. One is Bagram, another one is in Dilaram, another one is in Kabul. It's Dikar Khwajar. So most of the airports are controlled by Americans. There's a big, huge airport in Kandahar. My hometown where I grew up was made by Americans. So Americans are in control of those, and there are some bases that the United States uses for drones and others.
Mm-hmm.
And there is another question, whether Pakistan will allow Americans to use their territory for some activities inside Afghanistan. Pakistanis are saying, no, we do not want to do that. So it depends on, there are so many factors, so many questions, so many ifs.
Pakistan is normally pro-American though, right? Wouldn't they say yes?
In many ways, it's a pro-American because Pakistan was a member of the Baghdad Pact.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1990s.
Right.
The Baghdad Pact was linked with the NATO.
Right.
Then Iraq withdrew from that in 1958. Then it became the SINTO Pact, which is Central Treaty Organization. So it used to be in alliance with the United States military alliances. I mean, NATO, in the SINTO Pact and the SIATO Pact. But then again, when the situation in Afghanistan developed in Pakistan, the Pakistani military and Pakistani military intelligence groups have created their own fiefdoms in somehow controlling the Mujahideen in Afghanistan at one point against the Soviet Union. And Americans were helping that too. The United States and Pakistan and the Afghan Mujahideen were together defeating the Soviet purposes in Afghanistan. Mm. So when the Soviets left, they went in three different directions. Mujahideen later went in one direction, Americans went in another direction, and the Pakistani ISI and other, they were all in collusion against the Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. When the Soviet Union left, this coalition of the forces did not remain in its place. It disintegrated.
So what are Afghans facing? Because it looks like we are going to withdraw. And they've set a date. And so if there is this sudden withdrawal, I might, it's like a wordplay there, but I'm just wondering, like for the typical Afghan, what does this mean for them?
Let's take first the women in Afghanistan. Statistics are telling us that women are the majority in Afghanistan, because many of the men have died in fighting. So in each war, mostly men die, majority of them, especially in the case of Afghanistan, which there are no female army and units and things like that. So that's one thing. Naturally, women live longer than men do. That's everywhere in the world. So they're the majority. And they're almost powerless. And they were at one point not allowed to go to schools, not to work in offices and that sort of thing. They're extremely scared that when Americans will leave, the NATO forces will leave and others, and there will be less international pressure on Afghanistan or the Afghan government, probably all those gains which were made in the past 20 years will probably be lost. That's one fear. It's the women. Then there are the people who have worked with Americans. It's about 60,000 or 50,000 or whatever. Their lives, what will happen to them? Not only them, their families will also suffer. Then the minority question. The Hindus and Sikhs have already left Afghanistan. After the Soviet invasion, then when Taliban came, it used to be a very prominent community of Hindus and Sikhs in Afghanistan. These are the two different groups. Their status is in danger. And then other minorities in Afghanistan, like the Hazaras. Mm-hmm. Hazaras are both. They are racial minority because they are Mongols. They look different. And they are a sectarian minority too. They're Shiites. Overwhelming majority of, so there are the Shiites enough. And then again, in Afghanistan, we have Kizilbash, we have Baloch, another minority group. So these minority groups think that their lives will be in danger and they will be discriminated against. And so that's, they're scared.
Probably the Taliban would see them as more of a threat, maybe, because they're not Pashtun.
They fought with each other too. Tons of Hazaras were killed by Taliban, and hundreds of Taliban were killed by Hazaras. There is this bad blood in between them. In the Northern Alliance, as I mentioned, that only 10% of Afghanistan was under not the control of the Taliban, and that was controlled by the Northern Alliance. And this is one reason why when Americans went to Afghanistan, the Northern Alliance was a ready-made group to help Americans. And then the United States, different military groups and NGOs hired many of these people who, for Americans, were helping Americans, but for Taliban and others, they were the collaborators. It depends on.
Yeah.
Taliban consider them collaborators. Americans consider them as an allies of the United States because they helped the American troops when they expelled Taliban and Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. So from what angle you look at? From the Taliban's perspective, they're the collaborators. From Americans' perspective, they're the honest and decent people. They love their country. They were working, helping us. So that has not been resolved. I hope something will happen between now and
do you think that Americans, do you think that we should have been friendlier to the Taliban? I mean, now considering the situation, or what do you think?
Americans tried that. Zalmay Khalilzad, he was the representative of the Trump administration. He was ambassador to Afghanistan, American ambassador. He's an Afghan-born American diplomat. And he has been talking to Taliban for the past 2 years in Doha, Qatar. But I do not see any productive results from those talks. Still, the murder rate is going up in Afghanistan. Journalists are killed, women are killed, women police are attacked, teachers are attacked. It's a daily occurrence. Here, bombardment, and there are 40 police killed, 30 police killed here and there. So that goes on. It has increased. In the last year, this suicidal bombing and others have increased in Afghanistan. And this would be a miracle that if it will not get worse than now. There is a possibility, yeah, it could be. Maybe the Afghans will sit together and then finally say that, well, look, let's ceasefire and maybe it will stop. But the possibilities are there, but I do not know.
Okay. Well, it's always good to hope. Would the Taliban be able to take over the country? Because they did that before. So
they did from 1994 to 1996. From 1996 to almost 2001, Taliban were in control of Afghanistan. They had the government, they had Kabul. Yeah. So when Americans went there, Americans and Northern Alliance combined expelled the Taliban, removed them from power, Taliban and Al-Qaeda both. But they did not finish the job. Somehow it was outsourced to some other warlords in Afghanistan. They went to the frontier between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And well, we know that Osama bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad. So Ayman al-Zawahiri was second in command to Osama bin Laden. He's inside Pakistan in Pakistani territories. It's not only the Al-Qaeda which is active in Pakistan, in Afghanistan both. Now ISIS is there active too.
Right.
Sometimes ISIS is, in many cases, ISIS is more brutal than Al-Qaeda. So ISIS is already have supporters in Pakistan, in the northwest frontier of Pakistan, and they're active in Afghanistan too.
So what ethnicity is ISIS?
ISIS is majority of them are Arabs, just like the Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
Those 19 people that who hijacked the planes on September the 11th, 2000. None of them were Afghans, none of them were Pakistanis. They were all Arabs.
Right. Good point.
The two of them were Egyptians, about 15 of them were Saudi Arabians.
Yeah, I mean, just for our audience, we should clarify.
No,
the
majority of them are Arab.
We invaded Afghanistan because of September 11th, but Afghanistan is totally different ethnicity than the actual people who.
Then what happened? There are these people that who have become mercenaries fighting for. They fought against the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union left, they became jobless. So now they're looking for again to have the gun and then use it, and somebody's payroll. So if it's Al Qaeda is giving them money and weapon, they will fight for them. If ISIS is going to do that, give them money and weapon, and they will. So majority.
How many Afghans do you think would be mercenaries, though? Isn't that a small percentage of people?
It's a very large number now.
Really?
Many of these, people that who became mercenaries. Many of them were trained in the madrasas in Pakistan when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, the 10-year occupation. Most of those that were orphans, and then Pakistan hosted about between 4.5 to 5 million Afghan refugees. And many of the kids went to these religious schools, and many of them were trained to, they're the future Taliban. So the Taliban were the guys that who went to those madrasas in Pakistan, majority of them. So it's a very complicated question.
Yeah.
So those are in the pipeline. There are many others. So unless there is a concerted effort by the United Nations, by the Pakistani government, and now there's another factor. Whatever Americans are building in Afghanistan, Iran is sabotaging that. So Iran is not happy with the United States being in Afghanistan, succeeding in Afghanistan. The Pakistani Taliban and Afghan Taliban, they're not happy. And the ISI in Pakistan, the military, is not happy with the current government in Afghanistan, which is supported by the United States. This Ashraf Ghani's, well, the United States supported the Karzai, 2 terms president, and Americans are supporting now this Ashraf Ghani. So both Ashraf Ghani and Hamid Karzai has been declared as traitors by Taliban. That they're the collaborators. Yeah, I mean, when you look at it from the Taliban's perspective, Ashraf Ghani and Hamid Karzai, they're nothing but collaborators of Americans.
Yeah. Yeah, they are collaborators, but depends on your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's hindsight is 2020, I guess. And
yes, you're absolutely right. So no one thought, anyone, but the Soviet Union did not think. A superpower of the time, very brutal superpower, the Red Army did not think that they will be stuck in Afghanistan for 10 years.
Yeah.
From 1979 to 1989, it's a next door neighbor, because Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan were all part of the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union disintegrated after they left Afghanistan. So they did not succeed in 10 years. And
yeah, I mean, it seems like the lesson from the total lesson overall is that it's just really hard to subdue Afghans, like whether they're Taliban or Northern Alliance or whatever, the mountainous terrain maybe, or just the independent.
That's Melinda, you brought a very good point.
Yeah, they're not like a centralized country that has like this government that actually, you know what I mean? Like it's because of the mountains, there's people all over in their own little mini countries, I guess.
Well, these are the things that, like Americans had terrible time in the jungles of Vietnam.
Yeah.
Finally, they were using Agent Orange, just get rid of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The Afghanistan is a country the size of Texas. It's about 260,000 square miles, so almost the size of Texas.
Mhm.
Imagine Texas full of the tallest mountains in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
except one or two peaks, which are Mount Everest and K2. The rest of the all high peaks are in Afghanistan. These are the Hindu Kush Mountains, which are famous. It's a terrible terrain. It's a nightmare for the invading armies.
Yeah.
Whether Alexander the Great, Cyrus the Great, or Darius the Great, or whoever came to Afghanistan, or British, they were terribly losses. They did. The terrain is terrible. Even for the peaceful times, Afghanistan cannot logistically supply those areas which are
Right.
So it is the terrain.
War is all about logistics. I mean, like roads.
This was
It's hard to build roads in Afghanistan.
The Soviet Union faced this problem. They had to transport from a bottle of water from the former Soviet Union to Kabul, from a gallon of oil all through the air. I mean, all the roads, they could not do that. It's strategically, it's almost impossible. And Americans, and they were using helicopter guns and the MiGs and others. They were not effective weapons. So you have to have that where armies can move. So the terrible terrain in Afghanistan, well, there are similarities too. There is a region in Russia which is called Chechnya. It's very mountainous. Until this date, the Tsarist Russia did not succeed to subdue them. The Soviet Union had problems. Now Russia has problems. Yugoslavia is another country which has a similar terrain as to Afghanistan.
Right.
So these mountain areas give some sort of refuge to the guerrillas.
Yeah.
So that has been one of the factors. Yeah, military strategists have discussed that in some detail. That's one thing. Another thing is that for centuries, Afghans have fought outsiders. Literally for centuries. For 2,500, the written history. They fought against Alexander the Great. They fought against Persians. They fought against Mongols. They fought against even Muslim armies. Had terrible time in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was not subdued by the Muslim armies. Somehow the leaders and others accepted the message. That was the way. It was a totally different way of Islamization. It was not forceful in many ways.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So there were not a big, huge Arab army forcefully converting Afghans to Islam.
Right.
Buddhism, Zoroastrianism. Somehow when their Khans and chiefs accepted Islam, the whole tribe accepted with them. It was that sort of Islamization.
It was sort of like one tribe at a time.
Yeah. Sunnitization of Afghanistan did not happen in the same fashion.
Yeah.
The Khans and the chief did not become communist so that the tribe could go and follow that. And Americans did not Americanize the Afghans to follow what Americans are doing, or Hamid Karzai is doing. So it's not an easy country to begin with because of hundreds and thousands of years of fighting against outsiders, fighting against their own, against other ethnic groups. Tajik against the Pashtun, Pashtun against the Tajik, Baluch against that, Hazara. So this has been a sort of double-edged sword in many ways. It gives refuge to the guerrillas, but at the same time, it is very difficult for the central government to rule the whole country peacefully, unless you have to be a Khan in Kabul and Khan of other Khans.
Yeah.
That's what
Khan and Khan.
Khan of Khans, yeah. So
yeah.
That's what many of Abdurrahman Khan and Dus Mamad Khan and this and that. Some of the kings were ruling Afghanistan because they were the Khans of other Khans. And the Khans had fealty to that big Khan in the capital.
Yeah.
That has not happened in the past 42 years.
But it has to be kind of
There's no Khan of Khans in Afghanistan.
Yeah. I mean, I think with the mountains, it's and just the culture that develops around the mountains, it has to be a very loose kind of control. It can't be like, an iron fist kind of thing. So that's so interesting. And but it's really tragic. And my heart goes out to the Afghan people, and they've just had so many obstacles to get to stability. It seems like just when they're starting to make progress, something else happens.
That's true. That, as I said from the beginning, that the whole invasion was not planned well. The logistics were not. And then again, two of the neighbors, which is Pakistan and Iran, they were not fully cooperative with either the Soviet plan in Afghanistan or with the American plan in Afghanistan. We know that from the hostage crisis, which happened also in 1979. 1979 was a terrible year for the region.
Yeah.
The American hostages were taken by Khomeini, and they had the revolution. From that point on, Iran is a country which is against the United States policies in the region. Whatever the United States is building, they want to sabotage it. And inside Pakistan also there are groups. And then Pakistan has another problem. Whatever India is doing, India is a very friendly country to Afghanistan. And Indians are building roads and schools and hospitals. Pakistanis do not like that, because Pakistan and India are in each other's, they're on bad terms with each other since the Kashmir problem between the independence of India and Pakistan in 1948. That the Kashmir problem dilemma has not been resolved. So as long as that is simmering, there is very little collaboration between India and Pakistan doing something with Afghanistan. China is a little bit distant. It has a very small boundary with Afghanistan. It's about 14, 15 miles. They have not been active, but they're active in one ways. The mines in Afghanistan, for example, copper and lithium and uranium and others. Chinese are the ones which are just looking like hawks. This lithium that now have been found in Afghanistan, they contracted the copper mines in Afghanistan. China is taking care of that. So China,
okay.
Yeah.
So there are Chinese companies in Afghanistan?
There are Chinese. Yeah, Chinese are working and also Chinese are building roads in Afghanistan. Their technical assistance to Afghanistan they have not been very active in supporting groups in Afghanistan, like Americans did and like the Soviet Union did. So China does not.
What about COVID-19 in Afghanistan? And vaccines. That must be challenging with,
Very challenging with the very poor, what do you call this, network of the health clinics and hospitals. It's one of the countries. It's one of the least developed countries. And everywhere the literacy rate is going up in Afghanistan because of the 42 years. We're talking about 42 years.
42 years of war. Yeah, that's an important point. Like, the audience should know, like, it had great education, it had great industry, and was very progressive throughout the 20th century. But, unfortunately, just due to politics, invasion, other things, just been constant having to drop everything, all the progress, and just to struggle with like these different interest groups that invade or take control, like the Taliban and stuff like that. It's really unfortunate.
Yes, 42 years of war in a country. Of these 42 years, 10 years of Soviet occupation and 20 years of the United States, 30 years. So 30 years, two superpowers.
Yeah.
One left after 10 years, another one entered, it's still there.
Wow.
And then there was this 10 year of civil war, the Afghans fighting against each other when the Soviet Union left Afghanistan in 1992. So then there was the Mujahideen government for some time, then Taliban took over. Taliban were removed. Then Hamid Karzai came, and then after Hamid Karzai, now this Ashraf Ghani. Reconciliation in Afghanistan did not happen. Just like South Africa, there was apartheid, but somehow Nelson Mandela came, and somehow there was this peace and such conferences, and then that reconciliation happened in South Africa after many years. That sort of thing did not happen in Afghanistan.
Right. After
these 40 years of war. There is no effort of reconciliation between the Uzbek and Tajik and Turkmen and Northern Alliance and this and that. They have to settle everything by fighting, by guns. So South Africa did not solve that by guns. So finally they came over. So in Afghanistan, that process has not been worked on. And I do not know, there are some of us who think that it needs the United Nations to get active in Afghanistan. It needs the Islamic Conference, which is 57 Muslim majority countries. They should enter the discussions and conferences and others. They've not been given. The Soviet Union disregarded the United Nations for 10 years. Again, the United States in the past 20 years did not give any credence to the Conference of Islamic States, even though they are divided among themselves, but sometimes they do. And the United Nations is just nominally there in Afghanistan. Their agencies, whether that's UNICEF or UNESCO or WHO or ILO, they're not active because there is no peace. They're targeted. So for that reason, I think it's not the fault of the United Nations as an agency, as an organization, because their lives are in danger. They never felt safe. These United Nations agencies or the Conference of Islamic States, they did not feel comfortable during the 10 years of the Soviet occupation and the 20 years of the United States being in Afghanistan.
So it's hard to get anything done when you don't have security. Yeah.
Nothing. Agriculture does not work. Schools do not work. Hospitals do not work. People are afraid. They cannot leave their home because you don't know. When you leave your home, go out. Many of them are, my colleagues are writing to me, and I go to Afghanistan each year. When they leave their home and go to work, they say that, okay, I may not return. Can you believe this kind of, under that kind of psychological pressure?
Yeah.
You do not know that a bomb will explode indiscriminately in a bazaar, in a store, in a restaurant, in a hospital. So that's activities are almost, it's not happening. People, without COVID-19, Afghanistan was in that sort of lockdown.
Yeah.
Especially cities.
Yeah. And there's a constant flow of people migrating out of Afghanistan, I imagine.
You brought another point here, that there will be a wave of refugees living again and again.
Yeah.
Some of them who return back. Well, let me give you some statistics here. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, Afghanistan's population was estimated around 19 million people, 20 million people. When the Soviet Union invaded, 4.5 million of them became refugees in Pakistan. About 2.5 to 3 million became refugees in Iran. 1.2 million were killed and crippled. And about 4 million of them became internally displaced. So that's now the situation in Afghanistan.
Wow. So that, if you count that up, that's
1 out of 2 Afghan almost.
Yeah. That's like, let's see, 8, 12, like about 12 million. That only leaves, say 9 minus 2 is 7, but only leaves 7 million Afghans who stayed in place and weren't affected. And that's less than half.
Many of them were affected too.
And they have to have been, right?
Yeah, their relatives were affected by that. Their sisters became refugees in the refugee camps in Iran and others. So it's a terrible, no other country until this time. Syria is getting closer to Afghanistan. Now Afghanistan has about 37, 38 million people. The capital of Afghanistan, Kabul, in a very good time can afford only about 1.5 million people. Now Kabul has about 4.5 million people because most of those internally displaced people, they cannot stay in the countryside. It's not safe. they congregate in the capital, which is a little bit safer. And there are some sort of health clinics and hospitals and schools are available, not in the provinces. So that's one reason why Kabul is swelling. It's growing like cancer. A city which is only for the water and the conditions for only 1.5 million people.
Wow.
It's now 4 million people are living in that very congested situation.
Well, any last thoughts about the troop withdrawal? Any ideas for what we should do or what we shouldn't do?
I get emails and I get calls from friends and relatives and colleagues that everyone is scared that what will happen. They will again descend into a sort of civil war, which happened after the Soviet withdrawal. Afghans were killing each other till the Taliban came. And this was one reason why Taliban, because the Mujahideen government was terrible, so corrupt. The Taliban thought that we were going to straighten things and we will do such and such and we are bringing laws. But they did not succeed either. Al-Qaeda entered Afghanistan. Now, this is the problem, that when these foreign troops are withdrawn and the central government is weak, terrorist groups, it's just like Somalia and Afghanistan and Cambodia and all. When a country is, the central government is weak, the international terrorists find a very good refuge there.
Yeah.
So, just like Al-Qaeda came to Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda went to Sudan, remember?
Yeah.
They were either in Sudan or Somalia or Afghanistan, so they became active in those countries where lawlessness is it's just like when a healthy body can fight against outside pathogens. Because now a weak body, we can see that if we have this analogy here, they cannot defend itself, the body.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's not strong. The immune systems are not working. Central government is weak, police is weak, are corrupt. Sometimes it's weak. There are both factors. Sometimes judges are corrupt, police is corrupt, the warlord is corrupt. The drug dealers do not want Afghanistan to be peace there, because otherwise they would go out of business if there is peace and control and police and that sort of thing. So there are many groups in Afghanistan who fight to keep Afghanistan the way it is. They're war profiteers. War profiteers are the ones which profit from wars. They sell their things buy it cheap and sell it expensive, and smuggling goes on. So that's what happens in Afghanistan.
That's the reality. Well, I wish we would have helped Afghanistan make its whole body stronger to be more resilient. But it seems like the American occupation has done nothing close to that. Yeah, I mean, I think, though, that understanding the geopolitics of Afghanistan is super important, a really important lesson for all of us. It's not so simple to understand, what the consequences are of both invading and then withdrawing, unless you see, how these different factors are involved, like, different like neighbors of Afghanistan, internal strife and differences, power grabs, things like that. So yeah, so hopefully decision makers are watching, and of course we are training many future decision makers at Ohio State, and many who might be interested in taking your classes. Would you mind sharing some classes you offer, maybe some projects you're working on now, other opportunities students might be interested in?
I'll be teaching Introduction to the Modern Middle East in the autumn quarter. And if I succeed, I will probably teach contemporary issues in the Middle East, from what we discussed, all this and what's happening, the Arab-Israeli issues and Iraq-Iran issues and that sort of thing. So most up-to-date information. So these are the two courses. Let me, about 800 years ago, 850 years ago, a poet from today's Tajikistan, his name was Rodaki. Rodak is a place in Tajikistan. He was a poet before Firdausi, who wrote the Shahnama, this big book of kings. So he was one of the early Persian great poets. And he was a historian too, this Rodaki from today's Tajikistan. In one of his couplets, he mentions that anyone who did not learn from the experiences of history and the passage of time will never learn from a good teacher. So that was the meaning. In Persian, it's har ki namocht az guzashti rozgar, niz namozad zehej amozgar. It's in Persian. That a person who does not learn from the past experiences in the passage of time will never learn from a good teacher. So that's what, there are lessons in Afghanistan the Russians did not learn. First of all, the British did not learn when they came to Afghanistan and suffered a great defeat in the history of the British Empire. The Soviet Union came, did not study the history of the past of Afghanistan. They suffered. And Americans did not learn from the lessons in the past experiences. And we are seeing that Americans are leaving Afghanistan without building Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So the lesson, I think we have in English that anyone who has not learned from history will have to repeat those mistakes. So this, Firdausi said this about almost 850 years ago, that a person who does not learn from the experiences and the lessons of history will never learn from a good teacher. They will never learn from you and me, Melinda.
Yeah, history is very, very, very important, especially when you're studying culture and world politics. So I highly recommend Dr. Payind's courses, anything he's teaching. They're excellent. They really get you thinking. They put things in context. So do check those out. And I'll also post about them online. And yeah, anything else before we close?
I think I just said what I wanted to. And if there is no written questions or anything. And,
no.
Okay.
No question. All right. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Melinda. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.